All right, video about Oompaville here. Gonna react to. Um, I skipped past the first part because it had a lot to do with like Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein, which is a little bit too involved in my mind. It's kind of an interesting thing, like an interesting thing that's going on. I was thinking of possible alternatives, like as to how that could have happened, but it feels like there's a number of them that would maybe account for the kerfuffle of why it was so hard to get the Epstein files out. One of them would involve everyone being involved, like all of the government people being involved themselves, and consequently, no one revealed it because they all had something to lose. The other would be that the government was running some sort of op where they were blackmailing people, or someone was doing that, and consequently, the government didn't want it revealed because they would lose leverage over people either in our own country or abroad. That's a little bit, cabal minded. Um, The other one, I think Trump had even mentioned when he was talking about releasing the Epstein files is that there might be nothing conclusive really in them, right? Point being, like you could reveal all of the Epstein list, but it wouldn't bring like anyone to trial. It would only cast aspersions on everyone who's named in any sense, perhaps for no reason at all. So it's like one of those things, like if you're going to make an accusation, it's better probably to be able to actually bring it to some sort of resolution of some sort. Otherwise, you're just, spitting in the wind, raising tensions, or getting people's dander up for no good reason. It might be better to just, yeah. Anyways, we'll leave that alone. All right, let's get into this video.
It seems the blueprint for royal decline was truly established back in 1936 with King Edward VIII. This Edward had the shortest reign of any monarch since the Act of Union in 1707, when England and Scotland formally united to form the United Kingdom. With a reign of only 327 days, Edward's shockingly short
I think it would have to be kind of within certain parameters. I'm sure there would be kings who ruled for a good deal shorter periods of time at some point. It feels like just because the pattern of history, when people, especially maybe like rebel leaders, would not be the most stable of positions, where you rise to power on the back of an angry mob, like that, that can point both ways. It can go sideways in any case very easily in those scenarios.
rule ended when Edward chose love over duty. Edward had found love, but in a form that was controversial to the government, the church, and the public during the time. Wallis Simpson,
Lucy,
a
sorry, not
twice
her,
divorced
Edward.
American woman, was not viewed as a suitable
Although technically she was. Yeah.
match for a king, but the nature of how the relationship began was also controversial. The relationship between Edward and Wallis arose from an affair, as Wallis was still married to her
Lucy.
husband when
This time I did mean her.
these things began, a fellow by the name of Ernest Simpson. It was a big deal at the time, but not the massive one that it would become, since the relationship had begun years earlier when Edward was only a prince. The family, of course, disapproved of the married mistress, but it wasn't like Edward was the king, so who cares? Then comes the death of King George V, Edward's father, and then Edward is now to be king.
By the king, a proclamation declaring his majesty.
This is like one of the craziest get-ups you could almost imagine. There's an element where I kind of like the symbolism and all of the types and shadows traditionalism that goes along with the royal stuff, but just a purely fashion aesthetic.
His pleasure touching his royal coronation and the solemnity thereon.
The affair between Edward and Wallis wasn't reported in the United Kingdom, but it was widely covered in American and European newspapers. And even when Wallis was
So I'm thinking there's. Never mind.
to divorce Ernest to marry Edward, the match was still unthinkable for a king. As head of the church, it was forbidden to marry a divorced woman whose previous husband still lived. That's some biblical shit.
Based. I don't know what you guys think. I would tend to agree with that. That's my religious thing, though.
Edward had even proposed a morganatic marriage in early December, often called a left-handed marriage, which is basically you get married.
Left-handed marriage. It's kind of a nice phrase. for the record, I don't know if I had ever heard the term morganatic marriage before this video. It's intriguing.
to someone of a way lower status than you, and they don't get anything. They don't get any rights, ranks, or property. But even this offer was rejected by the prime minister at the time. So the king was forced to choose between the crown and love, and he chose love. So rather than creating a constitutional crisis, on December the 11th, King Edward VIII
I would say sucker, but I don't know if many men can really judge other men on that point.
broadcast a speech to the nation.
And to be sensible in love, I say to be sensible and in love is kind of an oxymoron.
On the radio announcing his decision to vacate the throne. He shared his desire to be transparent and the weight of his decision. So Edward's brother, George VI, became king, and Edward lived in exile. So the new King George made the old King Edward the Duke of Windsor, though he and his new wife would live primarily in France and travel around Europe, including traveling to Nazi Germany in 1937.
That is like, I'm just wondering, like, if I didn't know who Hitler was, would I consider that still creepy? But like knowing who he is, that is like full on.
Where he and his wife had been invited and honored, even meeting with Adolf Hitler. While in Germany, Wallace was treated like royalty, and she had never experienced that in the United Kingdom. And even though the trip,
There was actually a whole thing where I think Hitler was kind of, it might have just been propaganda or something that he was putting out, but he kind of felt like the English people were as like close to the Germans as you could possibly get. Like they were very similar, like the highness of their breeding and whatnot like that. And there was actually a whole thing too where there was like the Clifton set, I think. Clifton set. Um, it had been like a group of people in England who were wanting to sue for peace or something, or arrange some sort of peace deal with Hitler instead of fighting Germany.
had upset American and Jewish organizations, Edward still wrote.
I keep doing this. Okay, I'm supposed to be adding to this. I'm supposed to be transforming, okay? But there was actually another point to be made. I don't know. I wonder to what extent any of the countries involved in World War II joined because of the Jewish thing. Because it feels like I've said this before. Well, never mind. But the point is, I think most of them joined because Hitler kind of went nutso and started invading Europe. I think America joined because Japan attacked America. I don't know if they would have joined otherwise. I don't know to what extent, like France or England or a lot of the other countries involved would have joined if Hitler had not started, actually invading them. I don't know to what extent it was just because, like, apparently at this point there would have at least been probably stuff about the Jewish people. I don't know, like when exactly the rounding up and the exiling slash gassing slash final solution was implemented, and what part that played in the actual incentivization of going to war with Hitler, if any.
To Hitler after the fact to thank him. He said, "To the Führer, the Duchess of Windsor and I would like to thank you sincerely. Our trip through Germany has made a great impression on us. Many thanks to you for the wonderful times that you have with us at the Obel Salzburg." So you might say, well, this isn't such a big deal. This is, pre-World War II. We're not really sure what's going on behind enemy lines. The Nazis, maybe he's just schmoozing it up, and maybe Hitler really likes him. He's treating him really nice, and they're all just kind of, doing their weird shit over there in Germany or whatever. But Edward and his wife's relationship with the Nazi regime would continue, eventually even seemingly implicating Edward as a traitor. Officially, Edward accepted
Schranker. Yeah. Anyways.
Position as a liaison officer with the French following the outbreak of World War II, given his residence in the country, but still his friendly history with Hitler and his regime was not forgotten. When France fell to Germany in 1940, Edward and his wife...
Here's the question. There was some weird thing, I think, in France where they literally lost a battle because they couldn't turn their guns around for whatever reason. somehow when they were set up, I think they were pointed towards Germany, and somehow they'd flanked them or something, and they literally just could not, like, they couldn't swivel. Some weird stuff.
wife fled to Spain, which was then Portugal, though it was the Nazis who arranged safe passage for Edward and Wallace from their residence to Spain and then Portugal. While in Portugal, they visited and stayed at the mansion of Ricardo Espirito Santo, a banker who allegedly dealt in stolen goods and acted as a banker to the Nazis. I don't know why I
Banker? I smell a Jew. No,
said allegedly.
I'm sorry.
He's probably not going to
A
sue
little
me, I
bit.
don't think. He's dead, I'm sure. They had at least 12 servants attending to them in their suite before Winston Churchill appointed him governor of the Bahamas in an effort to distance him from Europe and the Nazis.
There was a whole thing recently where people were trying to analyze Lord of the Rings, and they're kind of coming across. For the record, my mind had jumped to Harry Potter, where everyone was thinking, "Oh, you're making the goblins Jewish because they run banks and they're goblins, and that's Jewish coded." And what? It's kind of like a little bit of like a self own. I don't know. It's kind of one of those situations where it's like he who smelt it dealt it a little bit type thing. And there were people who were doing the same thing kind of with Lord of the Rings. Oh, the the orcs are very black coded, and they're evil and they have dark. Like, okay, but that I don't think that's what J.R.R. Tolkien had in mind. That seems kind of more of a thing you're doing to it. Yeah, it's like a little bit ironic that in an effort to point out racism, you're kind of, yeah, I don't know.
He was just like kind of great friends with them, it seemed. The reasoning behind this, and it makes total sense, is that the Nazis had wanted Edward, the former king of the United Kingdom, to join their cause and cut all ties with the royal family, speak out against Churchill, and so on and so forth. And then, if the Germans won World War II, they would install him as the king of the United Kingdom if it had ever been subjugated. But some high-level vassal stuff. The official report is that Edward and Wallace had narrowly escaped a Nazi SS team that was sent to seize them before they set sail from Lisbon to go do that shit in the Bahamas. And many theorize that Edward would have been quite willing to accomplish the Nazis in British rule, which it makes sense. I mean, he got shit on massively by Parliament, the people of Britain, and so on and so forth. And historians that support this theory point to several pieces of evidence that point towards a more secretive alliance between the exiled former king and those who had welcomed him as the royalty he had been in Nazi Germany. In 1939, only months before the war broke out, he made a public address that the BBC had refused to broadcast, in which he urged the British to do everything in their power to come to terms with Nazi Germany.
Pansy. No.
So if you follow that with his supposedly Nazi-arranged safe passage to Spain, then Portugal, where he stayed with the Nazi.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to sometime, like, if someone did some sort of like what if type of historical thing on if England had surrendered, because that was kind of like the entire notion that maybe if like America had been attacked, like how would that have gone actually? Like if Germany had actually got all of Europe pretty much, maybe hadn't betrayed or started going against Russia and actually started to try and invade America. I don't know how that would have gone. Yeah, it is.
Banker, the pattern starts to really take shape, and
That'd probably been a lot more like naval stuff than already was.
it starts to make sense. But what is seen as quite damning is the discovery of the Marburg Files. The Marburg Files were Nazi correspondence captured by American soldiers, which were reviewed at Marburg Castle.
You know, actually, I have to go do something. I'll be back. All right. All right. Let's go.
60 pages of the files contained information and communications between the Duke of York, Edward, and the Nazis. One such page was a top-secret cable from the German ambassador in Lisbon, where Edward and his wife had been staying with the banker who had Nazi connections.
The Jewish banker.
Which stated, the Duke of Windsor is convinced that if he had remained on the throne, war would have been avoided, and he characterizes himself as a firm supporter of a peaceful arrangement with Germany. The Duke definitely believes that continued severe bombing would make England ready for peace. So not only does Edward state that had he been on the throne, the two nations would not be at war, he basically...
There was like... Sometime, what was the one? There was Dresden or something? They were basically like carpet bombing the whole place. It's like a nasty sort of warfare.
Says keep bombing the shit out of them and then they will surrender. That's crazy. Those are his people, by the way. And in mid-September 1940, German Luftwaffe pilots bombed Buckingham Palace. Also part of the files were details surrounding Operation Willy, which was the Nazi scheme to kidnap and
Remember, there's Luftwaffe, Wehrmacht. I don't know if there was there a name for the artillery divisions and whatnot? My memory from Hogan's Heroes is not clear on that point.
install Edward as
That's this Akak? The Akak? That might have been like anti-aircraft. Akak batteries. I don't know.
as the puppet
Or that might have just been a type of gun, I'm not sure.
king in Britain, since he'd been a favorable ally, especially when compared to George VI, his dastardly brother, who hated the Nazis or whatever. This seems to
Dastardly is an awesome word, for the record.
reveal that Edward was so bitter
Nefarious, knave, pernicious. I like pernicious. Insidious.
about his essentially forced removal from the throne to be with the woman that he loved, that he was willing to throw his lot in with Nazi Germany if it could potentially see him reinstated as king. But maybe he changed his mind. I have no idea, guys. It's funny because this one starts off as like, oh, it's love. You know, he's putting love in front of his duty as a British guy or whatever. And like that's
true. It's one of those things. It's like, I don't know.
Kind of interesting. It's kind of Disney movie-esque. But then a few years goes by and it's like, oh, he's kind of a Nazi though. So, yeah. There's a lot of dead British people because of him. So, for a decade after the war ended, the story was buried thanks to collusion between British and American governments. But these files were published in 1957 and subsequently denied by Edward. He called them complete fabrications, and the Queen's office put out an official statement. The statement was, the Duke was subjected to heavy pressure from many quarters to stay in Europe, where Germans hoped that he...
It's one of those things like, okay, so what would they exactly say? Yes, our son is a... It's one of those things where I tend to think if wherever there's a lot of power involved, candor and like real honesty becomes a very rare commodity. It's very like people will lie their heads off for the sake of a good cause or for the sake of their reputation or for the sake of political advantage. It's not exactly a place for conscientious individuals. Politics is. The best people fight the wars, the worst people tell them to fight the war. That's not always how it ends up, but it feels like that is kind of like it feels like it's the way it breaks down somehow. All right.
Would exert influence against the policy of His Majesty's government. His Royal Highness never wavered in his loyalty to the British cause. The German records are necessarily a much tainted source. The only firm evidence which they provide is of what the Germans were trying to do in the matter and of how completely they failed to do it. So all that being said, Edward resigned from his post in 1945 after the war ended and never took up residence.
To be fair though, I don't know to what extent they would have been trying to do it. Feels like there's a flaw in it. If they didn't think there would be at least some sort of warm reception, if they didn't have any indications that Edward would have been interested in or accommodating to some extent, they probably wouldn't have even thought of the notion of it. So I don't know if that's that explanation would entirely fly.
In the UK again. In fact, Edward and his wife were never formally invited by the royal family to any official public ceremony all the way until 1967 during the unveiling of a plaque dedicated to Queen Mary, Edward's mother. So this scandal, if you could call it that, stemmed from a relationship that the crown deemed inappropriate. Many of these scandals stem from relationships that are deemed inappropriate.
Yeah.
So the pattern repeats when Princess Margaret fell in love with a Royal Air Force war hero who was 16 years her senior. Peter Townsend, a fighter pilot and squadron leader during World War II, saw some of the fiercest airborne fighting during the Battle of Britain, with 14 of the 20 pilots in his squadron, the 85th Squadron, being shot down, resulting in several injuries and several deaths. The two had met when Margaret was only 14 years old, when Townsend was to be...
That's maybe like what you would call a common misconception, because you think of it like just from the movies that, oh man, they always got, shot down and they would die in flaming. Like, I don't know if that's just because they got shot down didn't mean they crash landed somewhere. Although I suppose that would, in their case, they would obviously have parachutes too, so it's not like they went down with the plane necessarily.
interviewed by her father, George VI, and the brother of Edward, whom we just discussed. This old man described Margaret as unremarkable, as one would expect.
Here's a question, and maybe this is silly. Why don't they have? It feels like you would be able to rig up something on a passenger plane where people could, in fact, have parachutes on the off chance that something went wrong. I guess I don't know. Maybe that would be too expensive or too hard to get them all out, or just not feasible to some extent. I don't know. I don't know. There's actually one I'd seen like an actual airplane design where they actually have a parachute for the airplane itself. I think it was some sort of it was a smaller thing though. It wouldn't have been like a passenger. Well, maybe they would have been able to carry passengers, but it wasn't like a big plane. Man, there's like an actual parachute built into the plane itself, which is just weird as all get out. Like I don't know, like how well would that actually work? It's an interesting notion, but
Of a 14-year-old girl. You see, it was 8 years later, when Margaret was 22 years old, that the two would fall in love. And being 16 years older than Margaret, Peter was a 38-year-old guy, a 38-year-old man. But back then, the age gap was not the controversial part about the two's relationship. You see, before falling for Margaret, Peter already started a family, and he divorced his
mhm.
wife in November of 1952, a woman by the name of Cecil Rosemary Paul. And Cecil and Peter had 2 sons together. And similar to the situation between Edward and Wallace, Peter's divorce made him an unsuitable match for the princess.
Dang straight. No.
Their relationship had become public after Margaret was seen flicking a piece of lint or fluff or whatever from Townsend's uniform during the coronation of her sister, Queen Elizabeth II. And during this time, divorce remained heavily stigmatized, and the shadow of Edward VIII's abdication loomed large for the British royalty. Margaret could marry Peter, but it would mean following in the footsteps of her former king, Edward, and renouncing her titles, thereby removing herself and her future children from the line of succession. But unlike Edward, Margaret chose duty, and after 2 years, she stated in 1955 that she was in.
It's based. Sorry again. This is my religious stuff, but I tend to think that divorce and remarriage is, in my humble estimation, not actually marriage. But yeah, to be fair, I think a lot of things that are civilly recognized are dubious in a religious sense of various sorts. Anyways,
ending the relationship with old Pete. She said publicly, "I would like to have it be known that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend. I have been aware that subject to my renouncing my rights of succession, it might have been possible for me to contract a civil marriage. But mindful of the church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have decided to put these considerations before any others." So yeah, interesting reasons, I guess, but royal biographer Christopher Warwick later revealed the real reason behind their love falling.
You know what's weird? Self-marriage, is that a thing that's recognized by the government? Like, is that like an actual thing where a person can marry themselves, like legally speaking? I don't think. No, there's no way that's like they're like accommodations. I don't think they're just gonna let someone have a tax break because they're marrying themselves. I don't think there's any way they would actually. Maybe they would give you a piece of paper, but I feel like there would have to be some distinguishing or delineations made there, because you're not actually, marrying another person. There's no financial considerations to be had really there. You're just, doing that with yourself. Weird as all get out, but it's a thing that happens, okay? Brave new world.
falling apart. That was, she just got tired of that son of a bitch. And I quote, "But the bottom line really is that, and she said this to me, they'd been apart for 2 years.
It sounds like Barack Obama.
He'd been in Belgium. While there was still affection there, love was no longer strong enough for them to have married." So there's that. And aside from what's happened recently, I would say the most significant controversies to play the royal family.
Well, that's kind of an interesting notion too, because you generally think of like the British people as being kind of, stiff upper lip, duty before all, for king and country and crap like that. But I guess they have their moments of tenderness too, in spite of the stuck up, pompous accents and everything.
Arose in the 1980s and 1990s, all stemming from the fairy tale relationship between Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer. Their wedding was record breaking. Not only did it cost an estimated $170 million, but it was viewed by approximately.
Yeah, like I said, I like some. I feel like some of this stuff like this is maybe a little bit unrelated to what he's saying exactly at the moment. But I think he doesn't like all of this type of frippery and superfluous nothing crap. I tend to like it. I like the tradition. I like the the rituals and whatnot that help connect us to our past. I think it's a good thing. Um, he does mention later though there's a lot of like money that goes into this type of stuff. So I could see the other end of it too, where it's like, okay, why are we spending this much money on this particular group of people?
750 million people worldwide, and they received over 3,000 gifts with 1,400 guests. Sounds like my wedding that I had in April with my beautiful wife, who's my version of Princess Diana. But I'm nothing like Charles. All right, I've got normal fingers. But despite the extravagance, the royal family support, and the public support, the two were ultimately incompatible. The two had a 12-year age gap, and Charles' continuing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles doomed it. When they'd met, Prince Charles was 28 years old, and Diana was only 16 years old. And Prince Charles thought to himself, what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was.
I think the age of consent in England is still 16 years old. But that like the whole thing is kind of weird. Uh, I feel like 18 is a better number to have, just in general. There's a point where like the brain is. There's a point past which I think kids are almost incapable of making decisions that they will approve of in like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. To the point where they're going to change so much between, you know, teenage or tweens to the point where they get to like 21, where like to actually make some sort of decision, some sort of like a responsible decision with regards to the rest of their life and who they want to spend their lives with and who they want to, get into a relationship slash marry slash whatever. It's better to, I think, wait some. It's better to push that line a little bit so that they're more fully developed and ready for that sort of thing.
He shared that thought in a post-engagement announcement interview. That's his words, not me making shit up.
Well, I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was.
What a wonderful 16-year-old. My fingers are fat like sausage. Like bangers and mash.
I did not know.
If he'd have said that in the year 2025, he'd have been crucified. The year 1992 would become a terrible year for the United Kingdom's monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. Now referred to as Annus Horribilis, or just a horrible year, it is a year in which the family saw multiple scandals converge into one. This big castle, called the Castle Windsor, would catch fire after a faulty spotlight set a nearby curtain ablaze, ultimately destroying 115 rooms, including 9 staterooms. 115, dude? Are you kidding me? That's right. 100.
Okay, what's a stateroom? Is it like the style, or is it some specific, like what it's used for? State. Got it. All right. Stateroom. One of a suite of very grand rooms which are designed for use when entertaining royalty. Okay, fancy, fancy.
15. They got houses with 115 rooms. Castles, whatever. 3 of the Queen's children had marriages end that year as well. Princess Anne divorced Captain Mark Phillips in April. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson separated in March, and Prince Charles and Diana would separate in December. Multiple scandals preceded the separation of
Mhm.
Charles and Diana, ultimately leading to their inevitable split. Firstly, the wedding reportedly almost didn't even happen. According to Penny Thornton, an astrologer Diana had visited, Diana had told her that the night before the wedding, Charles had said he really didn't love her and didn't want to go into the wedding on a false premise, leading to Diana nearly not attending the wedding.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess I don't really trust astrologers in general, but hey, can't argue with results, right?
Obviously.
Her friend and
No, I don't know about that. Maybe there were other stuff involved. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know to what extent I would put it down to the astrologer being quote unquote right about it.
personal astrologer, Penny Thornton, reveals the claim, saying it was one of the most shocking things Diana ever told her.
Of course, they went through with it, but it was not a happy union. Charles became deeply insecure once he realized that Diana was becoming known as the People's Princess and that she was far more popular than he was. He's kind of the bitch. According to Lady Elizabeth Anson, a cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, Diana sort of metamorphosed into a very, very elegant blonde beauty. They did a visit to Wales, which was the beginning of, for Prince Charles realizing, they've come out to see my wife. They haven't come out to see me.
Mhm.
Oh, poor little guy.
But I think just in general, women are like prettier than guys. Like the fact that they might want to see her instead, like no, that's kind of normal. Women want to see the fashion. Guys want to see a pretty girl. It's not the. I don't think it should be the end of the world for anyone to realize that yes, women will probably be the center of attention quite often.
I Imagine living in the shadow of your wife. But here's where things get epic. Both began having affairs. Charles with his ex Camilla Bowles,
Okay, yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
and Diana supposedly had a 5-year relationship with her riding instructor, cavalry officer Captain James Hewitt, who suspiciously bears a striking resemblance to her son, Prince Harry. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm full in on that conspiracy theory.
Let me see here. Huh. It is like is something there. Nose. Hmm. Yeah, that's that's
James Hewitt, who
conceivable.
suspiciously bears a striking resemblance to her son, Prince Harry.
Although to be fair, well, technically maybe it would have come through her side of the family too. I'm just noticing that I think both he and his older brother, I think it's his older brother, yeah, Prince William, kind of have the same balding pattern as well, maybe.
And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm full in on that conspiracy theory. Diana even reportedly confronted Camilla at a party hosted by a mutual friend, but still, everything came to a head when the long suspected rocky marriage drama went public in 1992. Exactly.
To me, the entire premise of marrying the person that you're cheating on someone with, or like marrying someone who is cheating on their partner with you, is like, okay, like, do you think there's some sort of special sort of snowflake? Because, like, if they're willing to cheat on their partner with you, they're probably willing to cheat on you with someone else too. It's like, I don't know if there's a, yeah, it's just generally speaking, probably a bad idea.
Exacerbating the honest
Apart from any sort of, religious concerns, I think it's just like a bad strategy.
horribilis. In June of 1992, a book written by author Andrew Morton was published titled Diana, Her True Story. It revealed that, with Diana's secret cooperation, that she struggled with bulimia, attempted suicide several times, and detailed the affair between
Okay.
Charles and Camilla, as well as her deep unhappiness. It sold millions of copies and decisively shifted public opinion in favor of her. She was the ordinary
Hmm.
girl who had been brought into the royal family just to be discarded for the prince's ex-girlfriend. It was even later adapted into a TV movie. And in August of 1992, just 2 months after this, Squidgygate exposed a phone call between Diana and actor James Gilby, who called her Squidgy.
I was thinking like if there's a like American equivalent to the royal family, but I think our basic the only thing we'd have as far as like actual like politicians would be, I guess, first lady or something like that. And then maybe just on a, like a social level, I guess you could say Hollywood would be something similar, where people often like, hey, look at the fashion, look at what so and so wear, and look at who's dating on who and who's cheating on who. Yeah, I don't know if we really have like an exact parallel to that.
meaning soft and easily squashed.
It feels like politicians in general might lack the romantic element that royalty would have, the romanticized type of the aura.
Diana complained about the family, expressed pregnancy concerns, and confirmed she was having an affair with Gilby.
It's so wonderful, isn't it? The feeling. Do you like it? I love it. I love it. It is absolutely wonderful. Years. I feel about 21 again. Well, I'm not at 33. I know.
The tapes were given to the Sun, and a phone line was set up where you could call and pay to listen. And over 120,000 callers paid to hear the tape. This is pre.
Uh-huh. That's a hustle and a half.
Internet. This is like a YouTube drama in 1992. You can get people to pay to do that shit? That's crazy. When the tapes leaked, according to Ken Worf, the princess's former bodyguard, the queen was so upset that she personally ordered MI5 to conduct an internal investigation into the bugging.
That's actually another thing that you don't really hear about super much anymore. Is like at one point, like sex tapes would have been like, "Phew, my goodness gracious." It's just not really a thing these days. I think we've been a lot like desensitized to it, so it's not really like an interesting or shocking thing. This is actually something I've thought about Hollywood. It feels like in order to subvert expectations, you kind of need to be able to create the expectation first. And I don't know if Hollywood is capable of doing that anymore. It's just kind of a collection of the worst sort of, degenerates and, you know, addicts that exist on planet Earth. So like the entire like I think they lack the ability to actually like to have that dynamic really anymore. Like they can't create the expectation, so no one's shocked. No one expects anything of those types of people really. And they're trying hard to be subversive, but like I mean, again, like who's shocked at them doing anything or everything? Anyways.
Princess Diana. That MI5 is their version of the CIA, by the way. And concerns of the surveillance of.
By the way, this is if you wonder what I've been playing with, this is a glass breaker from the back end of a knife, which I should put back together someday.
The royal family would only
Maybe.
deepen that November of 1992 following Camilla Gate. Squidgy Gate was a leak of a phone call involving Diana. It would only be right that a phone call involving Charles also gets leaked. Camilla Gate, also known as Tampon Gate, was a call between Charles and his ex-mistress Camilla Bowles. The transcript of the 1989 call exposed the affair in shocking detail as the way they spoke to each
other. I think I'd heard that name before somewhere, like Camilla Parker. It was in a British thing. I think something with David or Mitchell and Webb, maybe. I think David Mitchell said it in any case.
Other would in no way have happened if they'd known the call was being monitored. It's really weird that this is a thing that's just publicly available, and I feel kind of bad reading it, but I'm going to anyways. Here are some brief excerpts from the call. Camilla, you're awfully good feeling your way along, and particularly tank something. If knickers like live, it definitively confirmed Charles'
you can go watch it if you want to.
Devastated his reputation.
I already have enough crap in my head, so I don't need to add to the sum total of it all.
It raised red flags about the dignity of Charles and the royal family as a whole, and this was
the Camilla Gate was so scandalous and controversial that as well as the prince's comments simply being odd things to say, no matter if you were simply saying that to your mistress or not, both Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles were married, the former to the people's Princess Diana. Charles' dignity was brought into question, and subsequently people started to question the dignity or morality of the monarchy as a whole.
family that was supposed to be the shining example of honor and duty to the people of the United Kingdom, whatever the symbolism nonsense. You see, it's kind of
To be fair, like the thing he had mentioned earlier about Jeffrey Epstein, I would guess actually that would probably be one of the most significant like blows to the overall like image of the monarchy. Like it's hard to beat some sort of, scandal involving like underage kids or like the trafficking or sex trafficking or something like that. That is that's pretty hard to beat.
unclear to me, but the monarch for the United Kingdom is the head of the church. And throughout the Bible, I don't know if you've read the Bible, but Christians are told to honor their wives, and divorce is bad. Divorce is pretty bad, it seems, I've read. And here is the heir to the throne being exposed for doing anything but honoring.
Okay, so there might have been like a switch up, obviously, when I think one of the reasons they didn't want Catholicism in England and maybe why would they would have switched to Anglican or Protestant or something like that would have been because there would have been like the Pope would have been a huge component in the Catholic Church at one point, like a very significant figure, and I think England wasn't unique in this, but the notion of having some sort of external authority that was playing merry heck with one's own citizenry was not a thing they wanted quite often. So maybe in this case they would have said, okay, the head of the church needs to be the king or whoever. I think they have archbishops though in England, like the Archbishop of Canterbury and stuff like that. So I don't know if they would come under the authority of the king or something like that, or at least historically maybe they would have.
His wife. The relationship didn't survive the scandal, and in December 1992, Diana and Charles separated and divorced later in 1996. Diana received $17 million, but the loss of her title, Her Royal Highness. Kind of a good trade-off, if you ask me. Then tragically, the next year, on August 31st, 1997, Diana died in a Paris tunnel when her driver, Henry Paul, who was 3 times over the legal alcohol limit, crashed the car
Sweet
while fleeing
glory.
paparazzi. She was only 36 years old, and while the country mourned the death of the people's princess, the royal family just remained coldly silent. The royal family had been staying at Balmoral Castle in Scotland when Diana died in the accident. Her sons were staying there as well. And the majority of
For the record, there's like a ton of, I think there were like, I say a ton of, I think there were conspiracy theories involving that accident where like there were some of them were thinking that Prince Charles, her husband, was maybe involved, something like that. I don't know if there's any good cause to doubt her or like the official take on that thing. And believe it or not, accidents do in fact occur. So
the family chose to stay at Balmoral rather than return to London, which sparked public backlash. The perceived coldness towards the people's princess threatened the monarchy's standing as people demanded the Queen show us you care. It was an entire movement. It was only when Queen Elizabeth returned to London and made a televised address praising Diana that public outrage began to subside.
I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys.
An estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide tuned in to watch the funeral held for Diana. The tragedy forced
2.5 billion? What's that? Was that million or billion? Sweet glory. That is puts some of the divas today to shame. The YouTube that's some crazy numbers.
Worldwide tuned in to watch the funeral held for Diana. The tragedy forced the monarchy to modernize and show more emotion publicly because of television and people wanting to
Must be hard for those Brits.
tune in. 2.5 billion people, by the way, is almost half of the world's population in 1997. Just so you're aware. And of course, Charles, the current king now in 2025, would go on to marry his ex-mistress that he had during his marriage to Diana. He married Camilla, his ex-mistress, in 2005. So since then, he's been able to live out his dream of being her tampon. And believe it or not, the wedding between Charles and Camilla was also controversial, considering that Camilla, like many of the other previous controversies, still had a living ex-husband. To be fair, the stigma surrounding divorce had diminished largely by 2005, but still.
So they would have. I think he is the actual present king now. Like I think that guy is actually the king right at this point in time. So yeah, I guess that's now a thing.
Still existed, and it resulted in the Queen not attending the civil service where they exchanged their
Based Queen Elizabeth.
vows. So Charles and Camilla's wedding in 2005 wasn't the only controversy that the royal family faced. Prince Harry, son of Diana and Charles, would land them in the crosshairs of people opposed.
What? Okay, what is this?
Charles and Camilla's wedding in 2005 wasn't the only controversy that the royal family faced. Prince Harry, son of Diana and Charles, would land them in the crosshairs of people opposed.
And this, I assume this guy is the one who married Meghan Markle, who is a witch. Not a very, for the record, it's not because she's black. For the record, she actually, there are people who are one race and they can very easily pass for another. I'm thinking if I saw her walking on the street, my first thought would be, oh, look, an Italian woman, like Southern European or Latin or something. My first thought would not be, oh, she's a black person. She just like bone structure, skin tone, pretty much everything it's just looks like an Italian or maybe North African or something like that. It's just not really black looking. I'm just thinking it's kind of funny though that this. I'm assuming this is Prince Harry. Maybe he might have been the one that married her, or I think he's the one that married her. Okay, I know she's
the monarchy when he attended a costume party dressed in a Nazi uniform, just days before Holocaust Memorial Day. There was a lot of outrage during this. The outrage was not restricted to just the United Kingdom. In fact,
okay. Admit, look, I'm assuming again he married her, so maybe that was just kind of a oh I'm not racist type of thing. But to me this is hilarious as a series or sequence of events.
25 European countries began weighing an outright ban of Nazi imagery and symbols in the wake of the scandal. To be fair, I don't think he was following in the footsteps of his great-granduncle.
And for the record, I think actually Germany does actually. I don't know if you can even. They're very hard on this type of stuff.
Edward with this choice, it was just a stupid decision. I mean, it is pretty dumb to be like a royal, and wear that. It's kind of dumb to do that in anyways, but like to be a royal and do it is especially dumb. So he apologized profusely, and there are actually a few similarities between him, his situation, his whole Nazi thing, and his granduncle. Him and his granduncle both married American women. They both eventually renounced their titles, and maybe they're both Nazis. I'm not totally sure. On January 8th, 2020, Harry and Meghan.
It's like the ultimate, undercover long con, right? Marry a black woman to cover up the fact that you're a Nazi. That's the best conspiracy theory I've ever come up with.
Markle, which is Harry's American bride, announced via Instagram their intention to step back as senior members of the royal family.
I think they both lost their titles now too. Anyways, you guys can go check out the rest of this video yourself if you want. Oompaville, the British Royals, rabbit hole.